I welcome all of you to this Sunday webinar organized by Philosophy Family. Today we have with us Dr. Alok Tandon. He will be speaking under the title Philosophy of Technology. But before Dr. Tandon addresses his lecture, let me give a brief introduction of Dr. Tandon. Dr. Tandon is a very senior scholar of philosophy. Apart from philosophy, he has obtained his master's degree in economics and sociology. He got his doctoral degree in philosophy. He was awarded with a number of fellowships by ICPR and ICSSR. He is a very good academician. He has attended a number of workshops and seminars. He has also authored around 50 articles which were published in various journals. He has authored 3 books, one in English. The book is Man and His Destiny, with special reference to Marx and Sartre, and his books in Hindi are Vikalpa or Vimarsha, and the other book is entitled Samay Se Samvad. So he's a man of lot of academic activity. Philosophy Family is very grateful to him for being connected with the webinars organized by Philosophy Family. He actively participates in most of the webinars organized by Philosophy Family. He just not only participates, he interacts, he raises questions that attract a lot of discussion. So that's how the presence of Dr. Tandon attaches so much importance in the family. So we are very much thankful to Dr. Tandon, who is going to deliver his lecture on philosophy of technology. So let us all move to Dr. Tandon to listen to his lecture. Let's see what he has got in store for all of us. Over to Dr. Tandon. Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar to everyone with the greetings on this Independence Day. And thank you very much, Dr. Rao, for your kind words for me. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Indu Khanduri, who actually introduced me to this family, Philosophy Family, and that gave me an opportunity to interact with all of you and present some of my views. Again, my thanks to the organizers of the Philosophy Family, who have asked me for the second time to express my views on a topic which is rather not very fashionable in Indian philosophical circles. But that was the reason behind my choosing this topic. So today what I am going to do is to present my, to have 3 sections in my presentation. First one is more about the significance of philosophy of technology in the modern context. Second one is more concerned about the various philosophical perspectives which have been developed around the last 2 centuries to understand the phenomena of technology. And the third part, I will focus on some of the great philosophers of technology who have given certain insights to us to understand the role of technology plays in our life. So, first of all, I would like to start with the question, why study philosophy of technology? It is very commonplace. We all are aware that technology has become a ubiquitous phenomena with us. It is now influencing, I should not add a very strong word at the moment, but in our relationships with nature, in human beings' relationship with other human beings, and also human beings' relationship with themselves. So in all the three major spheres of life, technology is mediating, and to understand what changes it is bringing about is necessary for all the philosophers of the world, because one of the most important tasks of the philosophy is how to live. So unless we understand what are the factors which influence our life, how can we decide how to live? So the understanding of technology is of paramount importance. More so because sometimes we see that technological development has become a sort of taken for granted thing. It has become an ideology in itself. People think that there is not much to think about technology. The technology is all good. The development of technology is all good, and we should go for technology, new technology, higher technology, and that will lead us to the development of the society. So this technological model of development, that this technology-centered view of the human life, it has developed into a sort of ideology, and that needs to be questioned. Now, why it needs to be questioned? We have got many problems with technology, and I am not going into the details, but I would like to point out some of them. First of all, we all know that this technological development has led to the depletion of material resources. Earth is getting short of all the minerals and other things, material things, which are used by the technology for the development of the societies. Again, unless and until we have got some replacement of energy and the sources, there is no possibility of continuing this sort of technological development in future and for the future generations. Second problem which we face with technology is about the newness of technology. Many times, new technologies are adopted and we are not aware of their after effects, side effects. And later on, we find that they are disastrous. We know that trees were cut in the last century in a very big way, but at that time we were not very clear that it will lead to the erosion of soil, the loss of humidity, and loss of climate and climatic change, as well as many other issues. So technology leads us to is leading us to a big problem, with which we are all aware, and that is the problem of environmental crisis, the pollution, the water, air, and our whole biological setup is being polluted by the technological development, and we now face the problem of climatic change. And with the recent report coming from UNO, we are going to face disastrous consequences of this technological development within 50 years or less than that time. Another problem with which we were made aware by 2 centuries back, nearly, even by the Marx, that this technological industrial development leads to a sort of alienation of labor. Worker is alienated from his work, from his fellow men, from his species being, and from the product of his work. So the 4 types of alienation leads to a sort of dehumanization of man and loss of his creative potentiality. So this loss of creative potentiality is now continuing, and it has gone into the consumption patterns also. We now are being converted into a sort of purchasers, and the consumers, and this sort of consumerism leads us to a sort of loss of creativity and loss of a meaningfulness in life. Some of other problems are also very serious nature, and not going into the details, but I would like to point out the work of Herbert Marcuse. 50 years back, he wrote a wonderful book, One Dimensional Man, and he pointed out that this technological rationality leads the society to one-dimensional society and to creation of a one-dimensional man. The man created by this technological society leads only one single dimensional life, and other dimensions of his life suffer. And in a way, slowly and slowly, this leads to commodification of human beings, and the relationships become the relationships like commodities, between the commodities, what Marx has pointed out long back in his Communist Manifesto. So we are also facing this sort of problem even today. Again, there are some thinkers, they have also pointed out that this technological development is leading to a sort of a society which is being now under surveillance. It is leading to some sort of authoritarianism. And we know with the recent developments throughout the world that states are using modern technology to have surveillance on their citizens and to create a sort of obedient citizen. And this is where technology is leading us against democratic setup, against democracy. So these are some of the issues which we face today, and along with them, we all know that the technology was developed with the development of capitalism, and it serves the interest of the capitalists, their interest of the profit, and the states serve the interest of the states which owned that technology, and that is the interest of the power, as well as the interest of the military establishment which try to have violent settlements in this world in their favor. So these were the old issues. So now all these things which are so important for us, for our living, for our life, makes us focus our attention to understanding of modern technology, its place in our life, its place in society, how society influences technology and how technology influences society. But before that, we will have to make a very an important issue and address that issue. And that issue is important in the sense that there is a debate, and this debate is very at the crux of the problem, that is technology value neutral, or is it value related? Many people think that technology is value neutral in the sense that the values come only after the technology is used by the consumers or the producers or those who use the technology. They put their values in the use of technology, but in itself, before its use, technology is value neutral. I think this needs to be challenged. This view, in my opinion, is not correct, because every technology is unique. And here I will, in a few minutes, come to the distinction between science and technology. So every technology is unique, and it uses the resources in the knowledge, the material, and the energy in a very particular manner. And this manner is not universal. This is a choice. This is a decision. The technological design is guided not by the technical reasons only, but by the social contexts in which it is being created. And in a way, the values of the creator, values of the masters that goes into the creation of that technology, and that technological device represents those values. And it cannot be otherwise. It forces the way in which it can be used. You can take the example of any technical device. Say, for instance, we say hydrogen bomb. Hydrogen bomb uses certain material for certain purposes. And the purpose is the destruction. It cannot be used for construction. So the value of destruction is imbued in hydrogen bomb. This is the way the hidden purpose, the hidden value of the technology can be understood, and then only we can say that technology is not value neutral, it is value relative even before its use. To understand it better, we must understand the distinction between the basic sciences and the technology. Science and technology, they share something in common. They share the type of rationality, the empirical observation, and the knowledge of natural causality. But technology is concerned more with usefulness. It is not concerned much about the truth. While science seeks knowledge, technology seeks to control the nature. Science is concerned itself with what is. Technology concerns itself with what should be, what it should be. And therefore, the concern of technology becomes not how the things are, but how the things can be made, they ought to be. So in a way, this is a broad distinction between science and technology. And we must understand that scientific knowledge of some sort may be universal, but the technologies based on that may be varied. For instance, we know that the knowledge of electromagnetic waves is given by physics, but we have developed various technologies on that. We have got radio, transistor, and all, television, etc., etc. And all the technologies are somewhat different in their effectiveness. So, understanding technology in this world, though it is difficult to separate nowadays science with technology, and we many times talk about techno-science, but understanding the basic difference between the science and the technology helps us to understand what technology is. And here now we come to the, not to the exact definition of technology, but we come to understand technology in two ways. One way is to treat technology only as tools, as machines, as all the means which are used to reach to some purpose. But the second way, the background in which I am talking, is to think about technology as a socio-cultural process in which certain purposes are being served by the use, the rational use of tools, materials, things. So, in a way, technology is seen as a socio-cultural process. And in this way, we can say technology has got two components. One component is functional component, that is technical component, but the other component where we talk about efficiency, we talk about quantification, we talk about rationality, instrumental rationality to reach any purpose. But the other part is the part of meaningfulness, the part of social, cultural context, which gives it a purpose. And around that purpose, that technology is conceived. So, we should not confuse the understanding of technology and merely restrict its meaning to the machines and tools only. After this, I would like to discuss some of the perspectives, philosophical perspectives, which have been developed by the various scholars of technology, and they are can be classified as three. First one is what we call technical determinism. Second one is constructivism, and the third one is indeterminism. In all three, we can understand the three ways to look at technology and what they represent. When we take first one, and that is determinism, here technology is treated as an autonomous phenomena from the society, and its movement is rather taken to be in a single direction from the less complex to more complex ways, and the technological development is supposed to go through a certain path and other sectors of the society, other spheres of the society are forced to adjust to it. So in a way, it becomes a determining factor in the development of society, and it forces other sections to adjust to it. And this becomes the ultimate technology, then becomes the ultimate fate of the human beings. Not exactly, but some very leading thinkers like Martin Heidegger and Hillel, they are supposed to represent this sort of perspective. Here, we can call it a sort of essentialist reading of technology. The second perspective is of constructivism. In it, the technology is, as I said earlier, there is always possibilities of various technologies in a single context with a certain amount of scientific knowledge, and which design will predominate is decided by the social purpose given by that context. And in this way, the technology becomes a rather a dependent variable, and it is guided by the way the choice of the design is made by the context, the operators. Here, a very interesting example is given from the history of technology. Two very well-known sociologists, that is, their name was Trevor Pinch and other was Y.B. Wijker. They studied how the model of cycle, the bicycle, was finalized. There was a conflict of opinion. Some said that there were two options. One option was of big front wheel and the smaller rear wheel. Another option was of wheels of equal size. First option was favoring more to the speed, but the second option favored safety. Ultimately, it was decided that equal size of wheels should be the model of the cycle. But how it was decided? Once it was prioritized that we need something for transportation, not for entertainment. So the purpose of entertainment and the purpose of transportation, these are the two purposes which are not technical purposes. These are the social purposes. And they decided the design of the bicycle. We know that the first design also is prevalent in circuses, where we see jokers driving such bicycles. So their aim is to entertain. So in this way, we find that the design of technology becomes somewhat non-deterministic, and there is possibility of changing the design. The technological transformation, the possibility is there. Third perspective is of indeterminism. As we saw that in the first one, technology was dominant. In the second one, we found that the social perspective was a bit dominant. But in the third perspective, there is no choice about first or the second one. The third perspective thinks that both are the determining factors in deciding about the designs of the technological devices. And this way, we cannot say that technological development goes in a straight line in a certain direction, and it is the fate of the human beings. We know that when both the factors are responsible, then whichever factor becomes stronger, it can decide about the future of technology. People have come out with various instances. First instance, which is very much quoted, is the factory reformation bill, which was passed in the British Parliament, which restricted the use of women and children for technological industries, industrial labor. But we find nowadays states pass various laws against certain technologies. And here we find that there are laws against this abortion technique, using abortion technique to know about the gender of the fetus, and also there are other things, laws against cloning, laws against many new technologies. Now we may have laws against surveillance also, and now we face certain big issues with the development of artificial intelligence. So unless and until we have a perspective in which some sort of intervention is possible, we cannot have a technology of liberation, technology beneficial for humanity, because this has been a big question, why the possibilities, the potential of technology is not being actualized, why there are harmful as well as beneficial effects of technology we have to face. So this ambiguity of technology can be addressed only when we have got some freedom. And this freedom is a sort of, you can say, a political freedom. Now, about that we will talk a few minutes after. Now we come to our discussion about some of the leading thinkers who have given insights about our understanding of how technology works in human society and history and with the behavior of human beings. First of all, we must consider Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger, in his questions to technology, raised some very fundamental questions about technology. He made a distinction between the essence of technology and technology itself. He said that modern technology has become, unlike the previous non-modern technology, a challenging force of being. Previously, it was the bringing forth of being. Now it is the challenging forth of being. So, how it leads to understanding nature as a sort of standing reserve. Everything in nature is considered to be a reserve to be exploited. And in a way, it transforms human being, the understanding of human being also as human resources. This way, technology leads to a sort of, he uses the word inframing, a particular inframing of human beings being and the society itself. So this way, it creates havoc. It creates most of the problems which we face with technology today. But Heidegger, you can say it is not a very well detailed discussion about Heidegger, but Heidegger is of the opinion that still technology is not the closed fate of human beings. Human beings can have a relationship of freedom with technology. But this relationship is of some sort of attitudinal change, how you look at technology. And because of this reason, Heidegger was criticized vehemently by many critics, including his own student, Hannah Arendt, and others like Bernstein, etc., and so many others, that talking about the essence of technology, Heidegger makes a mistake of treating all technologies on a single plane. So there is no difference between the enabling medical technologies and the harmful, destructive technologies like atomic bomb, etc. So, and again, when he talks about so there is no point, no conception, no understanding of agency in Heidegger to select, to make a choice of beneficial technologies in place of harmful technologies. And this comes from his neglect of praxis, the collective praxis in Greek sense, in favor of poiesis. What he gives is a very romantic, poetic resolution of the problem of technology, modern technology. But he fails to address or to understand that by collective action, by collective praxis, man can change the structure of technology and transform it. So, after this heavy criticism of Heidegger, slowly and slowly, philosophy of technology builds itself from this very essentialist and we can say a very pessimistic understanding of technology in society. And then there comes, you can say, there comes Marcuse. And Marcuse will say that we can have this technical rationality, the technological rationality of which Heidegger is talking about. This is the part of a class society. And we can have an alternative rationality which may be free from all these problems. So he tries to develop a sort of aesthetic rationality to guide the technological development. But he makes a mistake, and this was pointed out by Habermas, Weinberg, and others, that he thinks that there can be a different conception, different idea of understanding nature. Nature may have some alternative rationality of understanding. And here he was wrong. Habermas pointed out that in the sphere of understanding nature, outer world, one is forced to go by the scientific, empirical, technological rationality. There is no other way. That objectivity is a must there. But it is good in that sphere, it plays havoc when it is applied to other spheres. That is the life world of human beings. And there he talks about a different kind of rationality, which is called communicative rationality. And he tries to balance this technological rationality with that. And he thinks that with development of communicative rationality, this problem of this ideology of technology, science and technology will be controlled. But as we have seen that this communicative rationality is based upon ideal speech situation of public sphere, which is not available in most of the societies. And in formal democracies, what we have seen, and now we are seeing that the discussion, debate is not free. It is not being held according to discourse ethics of Habermas. So we are left with the same problem, that how to have a sort of choice in technology and technological development. So now after that, we know that there is a thinker and very well-known thinker of philosophy of technology, whose books are read as textbooks of philosophy of technology, and that is Andrew Feenberg. Andrew Feenberg comes out with his view that we need technical politics. What we need is the democratization of technology, where the design and all the other things, investment, purpose, everything should be discussed in a democratic manner to finalize which technology is useful, which technology is harmful for the society. And in this way, we can check the interests of power and profit which currently govern technological development. So, with the coming of Feenberg, there is a hope, and Feenberg comes in the tradition of Marx. He's not in the tradition of Heidegger, though he accepts certain issues, certain insights of Heidegger, Marcuse, Habermas, all these great thinkers. But he comes out with a hope. And the hope is that of transformation of technology. And this hope is based upon his understanding of technological rationality. Here he talks about the way in which an alternative rationality can be adopted. The current prevalent rationality is the product of the capitalist modernity. So he proposes an alternative modernity, which will rest upon an alternative conception of instrumental rationality. So now, coming to back end of my talk, I find that this proposal is of Feenberg is very no doubt it is very progressive, it is very optimist, and it shows us a way out of the problems which we face in about the use of technology, and this is based on the model of collective praxis. It is closer to the socialist model, but it is not identical with that. And here, the issue is not the revolution, the issue is democratization of technology. And for that, he is very, very emphatic that his politics, his technical politics, mediates between the 2 points. One point is the democratization of technical practices, but with a larger view in his mind of civilizational change, in which the rationalization, the model of rationalization which we have adopted today needs to be changed. And for that purpose, I would like to quote him that we need to study this technology in all its aspects. And he wrote right in the preface of his most talked about book, that is Questioning Technology, which was later published as perhaps as Transforming Technology, that what human beings are and will become is decided in the shape of our tools, no less than in the action of statesmen and political movements. The design of technology is thus an ontological decision fraught with political consequences. The exclusion of vast majority from participation in this decision is profoundly undemocratic. So for Feinberg, the issue most important is the politics of technology. And unless we address to it, we cannot go to that optimistic conclusion he draws about. For that purpose, we may not have much hope with the formal institutions of democracy, but still there are ways of protesting, as we have seen in the Chipko movement, in the other environmental movements, Sada Sarovar, etc., and also in the larger protests of political movements also, where we can add this dimension of technology to other dimensions, because when we understand that human beings cannot live without technology. Technology has been with human beings since the inception of civilization. And I'm not going to talk about some other thinkers. A very, very important thinker is being left out, who died last year. And that fellow is Bernard Stiegler of France, who is very well-known philosopher of technology. He will say that human being and technologies are co-constituted. And the evolution of human beings is the evolution of the support system also. And the support system means technology. So that we may discuss in some later talk. But here what I want to say is that technology is not our pessimistic fate. And this was in a sense also recognized by Gandhi, though we may not go with his anti-modernity things and think about the modernity, the alternative model of modernity. But still, we see that in Gandhi, there is an acceptance of technology, but there are many questions, cautions, checks he wants to bring in technological choice. In the end, I would like to just to mention that with this monolithic, with this grandiose treatment of technology by the many thinkers, which some of which we have talked about, there is another perspective developing, another movement, and that can be called somewhat, that is called post-phenomenology of technology. And that is being developed by Don Ide, and this Peter Warwick. These people, they are trying to cross phenomenology with some sort of empirical investigation, and they want that we should focus more on experience, not only in phenomenological way, but also in empirical ways, and focus on at the macro level, not at the macro level, and think about individual technical devices and their role, their influence, their relationship with human beings. And I have got no time, but I found that IDEA has given different classifications, the way we relate to different technical devices. Our relationship with technical devices is not the same. The way we use telephone, the way we use microscope is some sort of embodiment relation, but it is not the way we use the technical report of MRI, which is not embodied. It is some sort of hermeneutic relationship. That's why he will talk about the background relationship, the way we use fridge, TV, etc., etc. So every technology has got its own specific relationship with human being, and it influences human behavior in a certain way. For instance, we know that before coming of computers, how was our life? We can understand before coming of this smartphone, our life was quite different. And we also know that the technologies of printing, technology, audiovisual television, technology of radio, they all have their value focus on different aspects of human beings, and they influence in different ways to human behavior. So I think this is a field, philosophy of technology is now not a very nascent field. It is now developing, and it is taking some new areas, and the way our technological civilization is developing, it is high point that we should look into the modes of technology and its place in human society, in behavior of human beings. So I was happy to know that some of the Indian universities have introduced this paper in their syllabus, but how many students are taking it and how many teachers are interested in teaching, I don't know. But still, I hope that such talk of mine and other teachers and students who feel interested can get inspired and come out with some good ideas and their experiences and their research work in this new area. I have only tried to introduce it. I have not given it an exhaustive treatment of philosophy of technology. It needs some deeper understanding, and I think that in some future generations of Indian philosophers will take this challenge and come out from the old themes discussing some old themes only and make philosophy worthwhile for the modern world. With these words, I thank all my friends for their passionate listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tandon, for a very nice lecture. It has the very new dimension. Normally, technology, as you said during the last part of your lecture, technology is not a part of the syllabus in universities, but it is coming up. So it's a good thing that is happening. Well, let's see how it grows into of a more of a constructive grows into more of a constructive pattern, so that technology becomes a part of philosophical teaching too. So let's see how the days come. But so in the lecture, well, there is no provision of synopsis these days in philosophy family. Just in 1 minute, let me just before we take the questions from and observations from the participants, Professor Dr. Tandon, he tried to show the significance of technology in the modern world by taking into account the various philosophical perspectives and the role of technology in our lives. He took technology more as a socio-cultural process. Having said so, he tried to see the ethics of technology, the relation between, he tried to even show the relationship between science and technology and the human beings and technology relationship and the various dimensions of technology by taking into account the various thinkers like Habermas and Heidegger. And one thing that comes, he has even talked of three models of technological determinism and constructivism, which he calls non-determinism, and indeterminism. So during the course of his lecture, what I could find that he more or less subscribes to a non-deterministic pattern wherein there is a design of technology to meet the social needs, or need-specific designs of technology. That is what is required. And one more important thing that he has pointed out is technology is not something new to us. With the birth of the human civilization, technology was also born. So technology is not something different from the human society civilization. With the human civilization, technology is born, and he sees technology as a support system. So with man, technology also evolves. So we cannot, we are in a stage where we cannot move without technology. And he said, it's moving with technology is not something new. With the growth, with the birth of human civilization, with the initial foundation of human civilization, technology is with us. We are evolving. So with us, the technology is evolving, and this should evolve for a better living. So let's see what observations are there to make. The participants have to make on this. What questions they have got in their mind, would they want to put before the speakers? If I look, first of all, look into the chat box. But before that, if anybody wants to raise any issue or make an observations, they are welcome.
Shall I?
Yeah, madam. Yes, madam. Namaskar. Welcome, madam.
Well, thank you, sir. Alok Saab, it was wonderful as usual. Very informative, very intriguing talk. I was just wondering that instead of Marcuse's take over on technology, wouldn't be appropriate to have Murray Bookchin's social ecology, which is worthwhile in the field of how much technology should be accepted, how much to be discarded, at what point we are supposed to remain neutral, and how far we should go. So I was just fascinated by when I read Bookchin's take over it. Heidegger has always been against it, of course, but I appreciate Marcuse very much, but still I feel that Bookchin is more worthwhile because technology is always has to be considered in social context rather than rationalistic. This is my query. Please.
May I answer?
Please,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please respond.
Thank you, Amit ji, for your presence as well as for asking this very important question. I think Murray Bookchin's social ecology is very important. I have also read about it and also written a paper on that. But the thing is, Murray Bookchin is addressing mainly the environmental issue. This is one issue. Though he links it with the general exploitation of man by man in a capitalist society. His contention is that those who exploit human beings are also behind the exploitation of nature. So unless and until those structures are removed, this problem of ecology will not be settled. And in a way, he is correct. Because what we find that in spite of various calls from UNO and from the private organizations, voluntary organizations, these states, corporates, and this military establishments, they do not heed to those advices. So instead of talking about the ethics of environment, last time I was talking about that, it is good that Murray Bookchin talks about the politics of environmental struggle. And there he points out the real culprits. But here I see some limitations also, because Marcuse is addressing not only environmental problem, he is addressing the whole problem with the instrumental rationality and its effect on human life and well as individual as well as relationships. So the canvas of Marcuse is broader, and he is talking about bringing about an alternative rationality to change everything. So I think this understanding and for the liberation of mankind. So I think Murray Bookchin can be read along with Marcuse for the environmental issues, but for the larger issues we have to go to Marcuse, where he tries to synthesize Marxism with psychoanalysis, and he has many insights, though he fails to understand that there cannot be a different way of knowing about the world. There, that scientific rationality runs supreme. So I think this is not the final answer, but I think you are correct in opting for Murray Bookchin, but he has got his limitations. The area is limited.
Thank you so much. So much.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon, for a very nice response. We have many professors with us. We have Dr. Ranjit Ghosh sir. We have Dhaneshwar Sahu sir. Well, Ranjit Ghosh sir, do you want to say something? Any observation to make? Dr. Ranjit Ghosh sir. Or anybody? Yes, yes,
You
Dr.
have very nicely given the problem associated with technology. the problem is always centering around technology and its value neutrality. But the thing is, when you are referring to Habermas, one thing came to my mind, that Habermas is bringing three types of knowledge: instrumental, practical, and emancipatory. Now, if we take the case of biotechnology or computer ethics, then in those cases, this emancipatory knowledge, which will automatically include the instrumental and the practical knowledge if we take Habermas seriously in his critical theory. Now, in that case, you have also mentioned about the communicative rationality. I think this is very pertinent so far as the relationship of technology with the human beings as well as with the social ecology that you are referring to. That is very much necessitated, the communicative rationality. Would you please explain it further? Thank you.
Dr. Tandon.
I am not an expert on Habermas, so to elaborate his whole theory of communicative action, this is the work of somebody who has gone through and through in Habermas. But I find, and other philosophers of technology have also found some problems in Habermas. Habermas' communicative rationality is based upon ideal speech situation. An ideal speech situation means there is an atmosphere where discourse can take place freely in public sphere. I mean to say that if there is a discourse, there is a debate that whether to accept the technology, say for instance, screening for this surveillance or for any other type of technology, abortion technology, then there should be a free and fair debate in the public sphere, not in the formal democracy. Habermas is in favor of deliberative democracy, where things are discussed at the ground level, bottom level, by the common man himself. And then only we can expect that various views will come forward and a consensus may emerge. May not emerge, but may emerge also. And that can lead forward to some sort of choice, decision. That will be the result of the communicative rationality working in a democratic manner, in a deliberative democracy. That is very, very ideal and romantic. Why? Because actually, generally, we lack that public sphere in a country like India. We have got formal parliament and all these institutions. Even there, we can't have a free and fair discussion these days. So limitations of formal democracy are there. And deliberative democracy requires citizens, real citizens who are aware of their rights, who are conscious about the values, who know which direction to take, and who can deliberate upon the issues of social political importance. Where are they? And the most difficult problem is the problem of asymmetry. In society, the power is unevenly distributed. So those who are powerful in a society, say for instance in India, upper caste or the higher class people or those who are very rich, urban people, they easily dominate that whatever public sphere is there, along with the media. If media is also not participating in that type of discourse, then there is no hope. So, unless and until this problem is addressed politically, only by expecting that communicative rationality will come and there will some sort of ideal speech situation will prevail and we shall be able to come out of some sort of decision in design making of technology is rather a romantic idea. So that's why Habermas contention is not accepted by the later thinkers. And again, he respects, pays a lot of regard to the critique of technology given by Marcuse. He has a lot of praise for one-dimensional. So I think the efforts of Habermas are in good direction, but they lack that strong base to implement that.
Thank you, sir. But how do you respond to the present situation, that ethics of surveillance? The ethics of surveillance, which has taken the entire session of the parliament, and it is related with the, you can say that it is one of the black period of the democratic functioning. So how do you respond to this?
This is a very important question. That modern technology today is working against democracy. It is being used against democracy. And this is the problem. That's why we need the interference of the people, of people's movement. And you have seen there are various groups, opposition groups, as well as various groups throughout the world who are opposing such move by the governments. And there are certain democratic governments like France who have instituted inquiries in that. So this depends upon, that's why we say that the issue is of technical politics. We have to come out and protest against and force the state and the governments which use technology in this way of surveillance, what we call technology for domination. We have to fight for technology for liberation.
Thank you, sir. Actually,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We have Professor P. Seshadri and Dr. and Professor Dhaneshwar Sahu to say something. But before that, let me take one question from. Before that, we have a very beautiful question in the chat box asked by Shravani Mishra. She says, in your lecture, you said that with the birth of human civilization, even the technology was born. So she says, in the past, technology was harmonious, it was cordial with human beings. It was not disturbing human beings. Say the invention of wheel, or say the various tools that man used, say the wooden tools, the stone tools, they were very much cordial with human beings. They were not, say, anyway disturbing the human system. So she is disturbed with the technology at present, because the technology, if mishandled, misused, that can be destructive. Well, there are constructive uses, there are purposive uses of technology, but technology in the past was more cordial, but that cordiality is not there in the present. How do you see this?
Who has asked this question? I know her name.
Yes, sir. She says, in the past.
Who has asked this question?
Shravani Mishra.
Okay, thank you very much, Shravani ji, for your wonderful question. And I must say that I agree to it in part when you say that technology before was much more harmonious with the lifestyle of human beings and society. This is true. But at that time, it was not so developed. modern technology is somewhat different from old technology in many ways. It can, with the help of scientific knowledge and with the development of mathematics and other tools, it has got enormous power to exploit nature. That power was quite limited in previous decades. And since this modern technology was developed in history along with capitalism, so this capitalism has got the value system of profit and power. So technology became the means for that social system, and it served them very well. So the whole relationship of technology with the elites, or the, you can say, the rulers of the society changed, and they in turn financed and developed an industrial civilization in which the technological rationality runs supreme. In previous decades, this was not the case. So the technical rationality, the dominant role of technical rationality in human life was not there. Now this rationality, along with rationalization of other spheres of human society, about which Max Weber talked, has come about. And in this way, the whole social structure is guided by this rationality. And this is the real reason behind it. Unless and until it is replaced by some alternative modernity that is not capitalist modernity, the problem cannot be solved. We cannot go back to that harmony which existed before. We have to go forward, so we have to tackle these problems. So we have to make a distinction between modern technology and the primitive technology. Only then we can understand the problem.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your response. Well, you have to go with technology, but the technology will. Let us invite Professor Dhaneshwar Sahu, sir. He wants to say something.
Many thanks to Dr. Tandon for illuminating us and such a brilliant talk. I admit my ignorance that whatever books he has referred to, I have not read them. One thing touched me very much, that in the course of his deliberation, he said that one view is technology is with man from the very inception of civilization, and as civilization is progressing, so also technology is progressing. But the ordinary concept of technology is that in 16th century, the age of science began. And 200 years after the advent of science came the age of technology. In the pre-scientific era or pre-technological era, even in the pre-technological era, because there is a gap of 200 years between the development of beginning of science and the beginning of modern technology. There was feudalism, there was war, there was a dictatorship. Society was mostly in a primitive state of condition in the pre-technological state. But after the from 18th century, the progress of technology started, And now we have also many problems like consumerism, capitalism, exploitative economy, and so many other evils as well. So the question is how we are being dehumanized, and in the process of rehumanizing man, when he is getting dehumanized, it is ethics, it is morality, it is social responsibility or value commitment. These things come into picture whether society is in the pre-scientific era or in the post-scientific era. When society was in the pre-technological age, there are many social problems, social evils, and also with so much of development of modern science and technology, we have also many social evils in the society. So the progress of technology has nothing to do, it is with human being, how moral values, moral commitment, moral obligation will be there, and how man will live, develop a rationalistic, a humanistic view of life, so that technology can enhance man's happiness. This is my observation. But I learned many things from the talk of Dr. Professor Tandon. Thanking you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Professor.
This is a simple observation, so not much to say about that. But two things I would like to add. That to think that there was some era of pre-technology, that is wrong. Even when primitive men used stones, sharp stones, to kill the animals to feed themselves, and many other tools he used, that was also a form of technology. So man is a tool making animals from the very beginning. So to think that there was some sort of pre-technology era is not historically correct. What I said, that there is a difference between modern technology and the primitive technology. And many times it is said that technology came before science. That primitive technology, people were using many things, and even today. Now we can take the example of yoga and Ayurveda. They are called scientific these days, but do we have real science behind them? Can we say in a laboratory, do we have scientific laws behind them? So the thing is, humankind developed many technologies, but they were not knowing the science behind them. And once they knew the scientific law behind any occurrence in the world, then what happened? Then there was a combination of science and technology. And the progress of technology it was in leaps and bounds. It became developing in a what we call in a manner which was never thought before. Why? Once you know that how to produce something artificially in a laboratory, then you can produce thousands of those articles in an industry very easily. But unless and until you know the chemistry behind, the physics behind, your progress is very slow. That is very trial and error. We could not even change our plow for thousands of years. But once we know how to handle the electric motor, then there were tractors and so many things. So the geometric progression of technology is guided by the scientific revolution which happened in the West in the 17th century, and that led to industrialization. And this industrialization, the industrial society is behind the development of, enormous development of technology.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Professor Tandon, shall I add something to it?
Why not? I think some others are also
yes,
there.
since
My friends are there to ask
my
questions.
friend Professor Sau has raised this issue.
So we should take some questions from the chat box.
What I want to say is this technology, which comes from the word techni, it is a Greek word. And you see, during the ancient times, in the ancient Greece, we find Heraclitus, Parmenides, and all other philosophers who have mentioned about the change or static nature of the, they got everything, every idea from nature. Even if at that time science was not in its proper shape as we consider it from the time of Renaissance onwards. But still, this idea of technology was there in the Greek times, and therefore, and from techni we get this technology. The word technology is coming. That much I just want to.
Your point is well taken. We all know that in ancient Greece, they made a classification of poiesis, techne, phronesis, and praxis, and this idea of technology is there too. But the science developed later. The science of Aristotle was contested by Galileo. So Greeks were not as efficient in scientific knowledge. So I also said that technology was there, the idea was there. Nobody contests that. I said that the sharp stones are also tools, and they are part of technology. So there is nothing to say that technology came afterwards in human evolution. It developed along with the human beings. And it is part of now, it co-constitutes human being. This is a very contesting statement. So today I am not going to discuss all these things. But I think the later developments of philosophy of technology by Bruno Latour and Bernard Stiegler, when we talk about them, then we will find that in what ways technology is constituting human beings. So then your standpoint gets contested, but that we will take later on. Thank you. Now I think some of my friends are there. They want to ask.
Professor Sesadri wants to say something. He wants to make some observations. He wants to respond to you. Okay.
I can see my friend Deepak Bhatia.
Yes, Professor Sesadri
is there. If you want to say something, allow him to say something.
Yes. But before that, let me request Professor Sesadri. He wants to say something. He has said in the chat box wanted to say something. Well, is Professor Sesadri there? Well. Let us wait for half a minute, or otherwise, yes, Deepak Bhatia, sir. Deepak Bhatia. Well, I don't have. Yes, he is there. Welcome, sir. Deepak Bhatia.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Professor Sesadri is there. Yes, Professor Sesadri is.
It's a pleasure to listen to you. And of course, I have to respond when you raise certain questions. Number one, we can say that we are all technological in the sense that the moment there's a problem of survival, whether it is the past, the present, or even the future, each human being tries to improvise himself like an animal to overcome that problem. So independent of what knowledge I have, whatever little I know, I can utilize to overcome the problem I face. That's how technology, and Professor Ghosh pointed out, the technique. And what is technology? It is perfection of the technique that we have by trial and error. And it progresses if it is supported by scientific knowledge. But the question always arises, why technology fails? I say technology never fails. It is man who fails technology. If I recall the book Ascent of Man by Jacob Bronowski, which was published about 50 years back. I'm not able to remember the year. Every situation, every age, every century, every year, every moment throws challenges, and it has been the military people, the situation of war or earthquake or in natural calamity that has given rise to the best of inventions to overcome, to teach us lessons. But if you look back in history, man has used technology more for military purposes than for expanding knowledge, understanding knowledge, as you said, Professor Tandon, for communication. This rational communication of a facility, which we call technology, which keeps on replacing itself to make technology better for human utility, I think throws a high responsibility on man, and that is where ethics comes in. If man is not moral and fully rational, we are in danger of technology becoming not a double-edged sword, but a many-edged sword that can destroy humanity in no time. So I accept your doctrine of capitalist technology for the simple reason that today it is centered either in the bureaucrats or the capitalists. How far are we able to utilize it for human benefit? Yes, there are benefits possible. There can also be total dangers and annihilation of man. If either due to arrogance or ignorance, it gets into wrong hands. That's what I want to share. I appreciate your views and hope morality prevails and man becomes more rational than sentimental about it. Thank you.
Dr. Tandon.
Thank you very much, Professor Seshadri, for your views. But I think when we think in terms of abstract mind and its problem of being moral, then we talk about in terms as you did. But when we look at the problem in a concrete way, then we find that there is inequality of power, inequality of status in society. And it is the upper class, upper caste, those who have controlled the multinational corporation, those who control the resources of the world. You know, 1% of the world population controls, I don't remember the data, but the very large amount of human capital. So when we look into the problem in a concrete manner, then we find that general you and I, ordinary persons, they are not responsible neither for the exploitation of nature nor for this design of technology. You know, these days, corporates produce certain things, and by advertisement, they create false needs in you. So in a way, you are being complicit. But the original source is the power in the society, the asymmetry of power in the society. If you say that there needs to be moralized, then okay, go ahead. But you know, well, Gandhi tried so much to make them capitalists and other trustees. But what happened? Who became the trustee? There was no change of heart. So in society, there are clashes of interests. And those who dominate the society with their power, they also decide about the future course of technology. That's why I say that the ethics of technology is not sufficient. It may be necessary, but it is not sufficient. We need politics of technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your response. So, but one thing hangs in my mind. Can't there be a sort of balance between humanity and technology?
No, you are again taking, what do you mean by humanity?
Well, a human response to
That's a
technology.
very abstract term. And what we are talking about is for the civilizational change for the humanity. The way it looks towards technology, the instrumental rationality which is dominating human behavior, we need a different type of rationality and an alternative mode of modernity. Only then we can come out of this problem.
No, even sir, why I raised this, because even Heidegger sees this technology at the highest danger. Because even
I criticized Heidegger like anything. I am not with Heidegger. Heidegger is a pessimist. He is an essentialist. He is against technology. So I am not with that.
Excuse me, sir, I want to say.
They want to ask the question.
yes,
Please.
Neeraj sir.
बोलिए.
Sir, in fact, I am also of the view that technology, on the one side, technology is not value neutral. But on the other side, technology attitude towards use of technology matters a lot. How we use a particular technology, that is dependent upon the ruling regions existing in the various nations. So, in present day, under the economic globalization, the technology is being used for the corporate houses instead of betterment of the masses at large. So, you are absolutely right.
I am not getting you. You are not clear. Your voice is not clear. I am not getting you.
No.
Let somebody
Am I
else.
audible now? Am I audible, sir?
Yes, well, sir, actually, Neeraj sir, actually, in the chat box.
Of economic globalization, the technology is being used by the corporate houses by controlling the ruling regions, by alluring them, and it is working against the general masses in all over the world or most part of the world. Even in India, the communication technology is being used in these days to misinform and the people. Rather, even through social media, it has two aspects. But ruling regime is misusing the technology for in the favor of corporate houses instead of the people. So, attitude towards technology, how technology should be used, that is a political and ethical question. You are absolutely right that there is a need of authentic politics which can control and dwell and use the technology in favor of the people. Technology cannot act independently. It is not value neutral in that sense. But attitude towards technology matters a lot.
Dr. Tandon.
I have nothing against what you said, and it is your final verdict. I think contradicts your original position that it is the powers, it is the political power, it is the corporates who dominate the use of technology. So it is even if I change my attitude, that is not going to help. Only I can keep myself out of that. But so the problem is not only of attitude, it is the problem of power, it is a problem of politics. So that we discussed. But what we miss in this debate is that technology is value laden right from the very beginning. It is not innocent, and it has got a certain type of rationality imbued in it, and that rationality goes into even making of machines also. So in that way, even if we change the political power, we may get dominated by some sort of technological operators. Many times, nobody comes to you, but you get addicted to social media, you get addicted to so many other things. So technology is not so innocent, but your point is well taken, and we all know that the powers use technology for that. Unless power structure is changed, that will continue. Okay, thank you for your presence and for asking this. Somebody else is asking.
Neeraj sir, please mute yourself. Deepak Bhatia, yes, Professor Neeraj sir, please mute yourself. Neeraj, please mute. Yes, Deepak Bhatia, yes, as Professor Tandon has said, please welcome Deepak Bhatia. Well, sir, please welcome. Please come up with your observations or any questions to put forth before the speaker, Dr. Tandon. Deepak Bhatia, sir, are you there? Let us wait for half a minute. Okay. Well, anybody other who wants to make some suggestion or make an observation or has or carries some sort of question in the mind, they are welcome.
Sir, can I ask one more?
Yes.
Sir,
Yes.
thank you very much.
It is by yes, Amita madam. Yes, madam.
I was just thinking that you said Marcuse's instrumental rationality is still haunting my brains. I was thinking that whose rationality? Because rationality can be contradictory, highly subjective as well. The rationality of whose rationality? Whenever I want to convince through reason, I can use any form of logical argument to do that. So at one point Heidegger is right, at other point Bookchin is right, at third point Vandana Shiva is right, at fourth point Marcuse is right. So I mean those who support or those who don't support, rationality of whose? This is a big haunting question to me, because human rationality is also for me highly subjective, sir, and it can be proved in any form, and that has endangered humanity, human species, and all the species in the world. So the concerns are very, very, because rationally I can just manage to manipulate things. I can say it is a dire necessity to have a language, but John Zerzan, an American author and thinker, he says that even language is technology, and that has created a havoc, as you know, because every language is subjectively understood, and see the problems that are rampant in the world. So whose rationality are we talking about? This is my concern, and a very big concern. I'm scared of it, in fact. Do I make sense, sir? I don't know if I make sense.
No, you really make sense, and this notion of rationality is contested, and we come out with many types of rationalities nowadays, and this question of whose rationality. And when we talk about whose rationality, then it becomes a question of you can say the relationship of power with rationality.
Yes.
So every power tries to, just like in manner of you can bring about Foucault here, that the knowledge is constructed by every power to justify its ends. So in a way, that type of rationality.
Bhai Sahab, एक second, just a thought which intervened in my mind, that rationality of Stalin in his own way, in contrast to rationality of Mao, in contrast to rationality of any person who is indulged in this kind of things,
That
dangerous.
is not the way to look at instrumental rationality. Instrumental rationality is talked about in a sense of dealing with knowledge about the nature and about the technology and the rationalization of public sphere. So it has got a particular meaning where certain resources are used for certain ends. They are the means, they are the instruments to reach those ends. So in that sense, instrumental rationality is very clear. The subjective part is there, but that subjective part does not determine the course of rationality. Say, for instance, if we want to make an aeroplane, or we want to make a new drug, say for this virus, etc., then the subjective part is there that we want to. That purpose is given by that subjective part, and that's why we said that every technology has got some element of purpose, the context, the power behind it. But the rationality which goes under understanding and creating that technical object, that device, that is not subjective. That's why this issue was taken to Habermas against Marcuse, that in understanding the natural world, we have to be objective. There the relationship is of subject and object. That cannot be removed.
But can the bridge be built?
But in technology, that type of differentiation is not there. They are both, you can say, embroiled in each other. That's why I said that technology is not only tools; it is also the socio-cultural process behind it.
Yes,
And the
yes.
cultural context is related to what you call subjectivity.
Yes, yes.
Hello,
Thank you.
hello, Professor Tandon. Don't you think that this power, power is domain specific? The power rationality is domain specific, as Amitaji told that the Mao and Lenin, Mao and Stalin, or Lenin, what she was referring. So there we find this power technology is definitely, power rationality is different. So if we talk of power rationality, then it will be definitely domain specific. That is what I suggest. How would you like to say this?
Power is about interests. Power is about interests. Vested interest, you can say. Power is about domination. Power can be macro, it can be micro. It is everywhere. But it is not rationality. It is not identical with rationality,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is true.
Thank you, Dr. Tandon. Let me once again request Deepak Bhatia sir, if he has any sort of observation to make.
He has left.
No, he's
Actually-
there in the list. He's there, sir, in the list, but he's not responding. Anyway, thank you, Professor Tandon, for your very nice lecture, and the interaction was also very nice. And the way you responded, it really it makes sense. It has added a lot of value to this webinar. A lot of understanding has come out. Very pertinent questions have been raised by Amita Valmiki, Professor Ranjit Ghosh sir, Sisadri sir, Dhaneshwar Saul sir and others, and even Sramani Misra. So very good lecture, and the responses are very beautiful. The responses were still more beautiful than the lecture, because the responses are so good. Really, they have added a lot of value to this webinar. Now I request our admin, Professor Pramod Kumar Das, to make his own observations and propose a formal vote of thanks. Over to Professor Pramod Kumar Das.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Namaskar, Dr. Tandon, sir. Namaskar, sir. Namaskar, Namaskar, sir.
How are you, sir?
Yes, sir. Very fine. I really enjoyed your talk, sir. It was very analytic. I have nothing to say. I really appreciated, sir. Your English. Your English. I love your English, sir. That was wonderful. Your way of presentation, dealing with the issues, clarity, everything was wonderful, sir. I shall speak only one thing. Freedom and determinism. Freedom and determinism. This is the very important question. In science, philosophy, religion, in every field, this question is very important, that man is free or determined. Technology is created by man. That means man is free to create technology. Man is also free not to create technology. That freedom man has. Man can transform science to technology. But once the technology is created, man becomes determined by technology. That is a threat to human freedom. Therefore, any rationalization on freedom, any politicalization on freedom, any diplomacy on freedom can't help to compensate this loss. Because man is the seeker of freedom. If man is not free, he is a slave. So when man creates technology, and after the creation of technology, man is determined by technology, because the very presence of technology has two possibilities. It can create or destroy. So if there is a possibility of destruction, that percentage may be very low, or it is because of the irrational management of technology. Whatever may be the cause, if there will be one click, one button, the entire creation will be destroyed, and there will be nobody to ask whether it is rational or irrational, logical or illogical, right or wrong, practical or theoretical. There will be nobody to discuss. That means my point is, technology is good. Technology is good for civilization, for evolution, but this possibility is there. Man loses his freedom and becomes determined by technology, because technology can be used and misused. So the possibility of a misuse of technology is there. It may not be by you or by me or by, but if one man, one uncivilized ear to click that button to destroy the entire creation. So that is a threat to human existence. This possibility is there, along with all the benefits of technology. This is my observation, but I enjoyed this talk in all respects. I thank Professor Tandon for his benign presence with us in this meeting and he beautifully delivered his talk analytically from different perspectives, and he justified all the questions raised by the participants. He himself was enjoying his talk, and he was also taking a rest because he was very much convenient about his convictions, understanding. I thank you, sir. I am really grateful. You were talking of the quality of the webinar, and you also proved it that this should be the quality of your webinar. This should be the quality of an intellectual. It should be the. No, yes, sir. We acknowledge that. This should be the quality of an intellectual discussion. Thank you, sir. I thank all the participants, learned professors, dignitaries, students for their presence and participation in discussion. And I am really grateful to Dr. K.M. Narayan Rao. Today he played many roles. He coordinated the entire program, and also he moderated, and also he interpreted, gave his own observation. And it is really wonderful of Dr. Rao. Philosophy family is grateful to Dr. Rao for his very honest involvement in our programs. Thank you, sir. And I thank you all. We shall meet again in next Sunday. Thank you all.
Thanks to all the question raisers and all the participants for making this webinar so nice, so successful. So a lot of things have been learned in this webinar. Thank you very much. Sir, please declare the meeting closed.
Yes, the meeting is now closed. Thank you all.